Split Rock Reservoir Cave Bear Attack. On the 20th of December 2015, Christopher Petronino took 3 Boy Scouts hiking in Split Rock Reservoir, New Jersey. He was 50 years old and an experienced scout leader. He wanted to show them a small talus cave he had visited many times before. Just 2 weeks earlier, he had been to the same cave without problems. The cave opening was barely 2 feet wide between massive boulders. Petronino approached and began squeezing through feet first. His waist caught on a protruding edge as he descended. What he didn't know was that a 300-pound black bear was hiding in the darkness. The bear had claimed the cave as winter shelter. Suddenly, something grabbed Petronino's foot with powerful force. He was yanked deeper into the cave by the bear. The bear began attacking, biting his legs and raking claws across his shoulders and head. In absolute darkness, Petronino couldn't see his attacker. Outside, the 3 scouts saw their leader pulled violently into the darkness. They heard terrible sounds and immediately called 911. Inside, Petronino found his rock hammer and swung it at the bear's head. 2 strikes connected, creating a brief pause in the assault. He pulled his sweatshirt over his head and curled into a fetal position against the wall. The scouts placed food near the entrance to lure the bear out and built a signal fire. After 80 minutes trapped in darkness, the bear finally left the cave. Petronino crawled toward the light with torn and bleeding wounds covering his body. A helicopter airlifted him to the hospital. He had extensive bite marks and lacerations on his head, shoulders, arms, and legs. His injuries were serious but survivable. Cenote Odyssey Cave Tragedy. On the 23rd of April 2022, a 32-year-old Russian cave diver prepared to explore Cenote Odyssey in Mexico. Cenote Odyssey was a portal into Sistema Oxbel-Ha, one of Earth's longest underwater cave systems, stretching 270 miles. The diver was highly experienced with full cave certification, stage cave certification, and DPV certification. He had trained extensively in these caves and dived Cenote Odyssey many times before. His mission was routine survey work, resurveying existing lines to improve mapping accuracy. He carried 4 aluminum 80 cubic foot tanks filled with 32% nitrox and 2 additional stage tanks. He also had a DPV scooter that could pull him through passages at 150 to 200 feet per minute. At 10 a.m. Saturday morning, he descended into the cenote alone. The sunlight faded as he moved deeper into absolute darkness. Hours passed and afternoon became evening. Neighbors near the cenote noticed his vehicle and dive equipment still there with no diver surfaced. After 8, 9, 10 hours underwater, something was clearly wrong. Local cave divers were contacted and a search team was organized. At 2:57 a.m. Sunday morning, nearly 17 hours after he descended, the first search team entered the water. They found him 700 feet from the entrance, 7 minutes of scooter time away. He was face down in the water with his helmet and mask still on. Both of his primary side-mounted tanks were attached with valves fully open. Both tanks read completely empty. His first stage tank was clipped to the guideline, valve open, tank empty. His second stage tank was also clipped to the guideline with the valve closed. When the search team checked the pressure gauge, it read 170 bar, 2,465 psi. The tank was full with approximately 40 cubic feet of breathable gas, more than enough to reach the surface and survive. His DPV scooter was clipped to the line and functioning normally. Everything he needed to survive was within arm's reach. The recovery team brought his body to the surface at 1:30 p.m. Sunday, 27 and a half hours after he entered. They examined every piece of equipment and found nothing wrong. No mechanical failures, no equipment malfunctions. The closed valve on the full tank haunted investigators. One turn of the wrist could have opened it and saved his life. Agua Caliente Cave Tragedy. On 31st December 1990, Kevin Sears and his friend explored Agua Caliente Cave in Arizona. Kevin was 21 years old with several caves already explored. They wore jeans, short-sleeve shirts, and tennis shoes with only flashlights and 50 feet of rope. Neither wore helmets. At 11 a.m., they entered through the narrow upper entrance. They planned to complete the cave's loop in the clockwise direction. 8 minutes later, they reached the loop pit, a 40-foot vertical shaft. They descended hand over hand without proper rappelling gear. By 1 p.m., they reached the white sand room but couldn't find the familiar passage. At 1:30 p.m., they turned back, their flashlights growing dimmer. Finally, they recognized the loop pit. Kevin gripped the rope and began climbing. Near the top, he encountered flowstone, a smooth mineral deposit. His tennis shoes slipped on the slick surface and he fell, crashing onto the cave floor. After catching his breath, he climbed again. Again, his feet slipped on the flowstone. This time, he landed awkwardly with searing pain through his leg and hip. He couldn't stand and appeared to have fractured his femur and pelvis. His friend left to get help, reaching a phone at 3 p.m. The Southern Arizona Rescue Association was notified at 7 p.m. Rescuers found Kevin conscious in complete darkness after his flashlight died. They secured him to a backboard and rigged 4 hauling systems. At 11:15 p.m., nearly 12 hours after entering, Kevin was hauled up through the loop pit. He emerged at 2 a.m. on New Year's Day and was airlifted to the hospital. Doctors discovered no bones were actually broken despite the excruciating pain. Kevin only had bruises and abrasions after falling twice in the dark cave. Lost in the dark. On April 12, 2016, Dimitar was a 41-year-old man who lived in Chepelare, a small village in Bulgaria. He was born with mental disabilities and possessed a childlike wonder about the world around him. He lived with his devoted grandmother and loved exploring interesting places around the village. For weeks, Dimitar had been curious about a cave entrance he noticed near his hometown called Ushka Cave. One April morning, he decided to explore it. He grabbed a small flashlight and set off to satisfy his curiosity about what lay beyond that mysterious entrance. Ushka Cave welcomed him with a horizontal passage that seemed easy to navigate. The cave was completely dry and 466 feet long, appearing to be nothing more than a simple tunnel through the limestone. Dimitar's small frame allowed him to move through the narrower sections with ease. The initial passages were straightforward enough, and Dimitar felt confident as he explored the main tunnel. As he ventured further into the cave system, he encountered several side passages that branched off from the main tunnel. These smaller passages intrigued him, and he began exploring them one by one. He crawled through increasingly tight spaces with the determination of someone driven by pure curiosity. Each side passage seemed to lead to another, creating a maze-like network that gradually drew him deeper into the cave's interior. Dimitar tried to retrace his route back to the entrance, but the cave's layout became confusing in reverse. Multiple passages looked similar, and without any system for marking his route, he began to second-guess which tunnel would lead him back to daylight. He spent precious time crawling back and forth between passages that all began to look the same. As he struggled through the narrow spaces, he somehow lost his jacket and left it behind in his confused state. Each wrong turn deepened his confusion and used up more of his flashlight's battery power. As hours passed, Dimitar's small flashlight began to dim. When the flashlight finally died, Dimitar found himself engulfed in a darkness more complete than anything he had ever experienced. He couldn't even see his own hands in front of his face. Unable to navigate in the pitch-black conditions and exhausted from his frantic attempts to find the exit, he crawled into one of the narrow side passages. In that cramped space, about 82 feet from the cave entrance but impossibly lost in the darkness, Dimitar curled up in what seemed like a comfortable position. Perhaps he believed that someone would come looking for him, or that he could wait for daylight to somehow find its way into the cave. But what Dimitar couldn't comprehend was how quickly the cave's environment would affect his body. The constant temperature deep underground was significantly cooler than the warm April air outside. Without proper clothing or any source of heat, his body began losing its core temperature. Combined with exhaustion from his ordeal, hypothermia began to set in as he lay in his makeshift resting place. But he kept waiting for someone to come get him. Outside the cave, as hours turned to days, Dimitar's grandmother began to worry. When he failed to return home that first evening, she assumed he had found something particularly interesting. But as the second day passed without any sign of him, her concern turned to alarm. The small village erupted into chaos as word spread that Dimitar was missing. Neighbors organized search parties, combing the surrounding countryside and checking every location where he was known to spend time. Local authorities were contacted, and a wider search began. Police officers interviewed villagers, trying to piece together his last known movements. The search expanded to include nearby fields, forests, and abandoned buildings, but no trace of him could be found. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Meanwhile, deep in the darkness of Ushka Cave, Dimitar lay motionless in the narrow side passage where he had sought refuge. The cave's dry environment had begun the slow process of preserving his remains. 5 months passed before police received crucial information that Dimitar had expressed interest in visiting the local cave. This breakthrough finally gave searchers a specific location to investigate. Fire safety and civil protection teams conducted an initial search on September 14, 2016. When they found his jacket and flashlight inside the passages but couldn't reach the deeper sections, the Bulgarian cave rescue team was called in. On September 15, 2016, 2 experienced cave rescuers squeezed through the narrow passages of Ushka Cave. At 3:30 p.m., they discovered his remains in the side passage where he had curled up to rest. His body was positioned exactly as he had settled down on that fateful April day when his adventure had turned into a tragedy. The advanced state of decomposition after 5 months in the cave made the recovery operation extremely challenging. At 6 p.m. the cave rescue team returned to the depths, now equipped with protective masks and gloves. Working in the cramped, suffocating confines of the narrow passage, the rescuers had to first dig out the cave floor to create enough space. 2 rescuers carefully placed a specialized sling around Dimitar's body and began the painstaking process of sliding him out of the tight squeeze. After hours of methodical work, Dimitar's remains were finally brought to the surface at 8:05 p.m. The investigation revealed that Dimitar had died from hypothermia and exhaustion. He was trapped, not by the cave's physical constraints, but by the impenetrable darkness that followed his flashlight's failure. His innocent exploration had turned deadly when proper preparation and safety measures were absent. Big 4 Ice Caves Incident. On 31st July 2010, the Tam family set out for a perfect day in the wilderness. They were visiting the Big 4 Ice Caves in Snohomish County, Washington. Grace Tam was an 11-year-old girl with a sweet nature and bright intelligence. She walked eagerly with her parents up the 1 1-mile hiking trail. The Big Four ice caves were one of Washington state's most popular destinations. Thousands of families visited each year to see the spectacular ice formations. When they arrived, the massive walls of blue-white ice were breathtaking. Large yellow warning signs were posted everywhere. The signs clearly stated that visitors should not enter the ice caves. The ice formations were incredibly dangerous and constantly shifting. The Tam family was responsible and heeded the warnings. They settled on a rock formation about 15 feet from the cave entrance. This seemed like a safe distance. Grace sat contentedly between her parents, enjoying their picnic lunch. Her eyes were wide with wonder at the frozen spectacle. What they didn't know was that danger lurked above them. High above the cave entrance, an enormous chunk of ice was ready to fall. It was roughly the size of a pickup truck and weighed several tons. Without any warning sound, the massive ice formation suddenly broke free. It plummeted directly toward where Grace sat with her parents. Grace had no time to react or escape. The sound of impact was tremendous. Grace disappeared beneath tons of falling ice. Her parents were sitting just inches away. Complete strangers visiting the caves immediately rushed to help. They began performing CPR on Grace desperately. Some visitors ran back down the trail for help, but cell phone service didn't work at the caves. They had to drive 7 more miles to call emergency services. Professional rescue workers had to carry equipment up the mile-long hiking trail. 2 hours and 20 minutes passed before rescuers arrived. Despite everyone's heroic efforts, it was too late. Grace Tam succumbed to her crushing pelvic injuries. Her small body could not withstand the tons of ice that fell on her. The 11-year-old girl who began the day with excitement was gone. Howe Caverns incident. On the 24th of April, 1930, a massive explosion shook the hills of New York. It was 5 o'clock in the morning. Workers at the North American Cement Company quarry detonated 7.5 tons of dynamite. The blast was so powerful it could be heard for miles. Shockwaves spread through the bedrock, creating hairline cracks in the limestone. These cracks reached down toward Howe Caverns below. The quarry workers had no idea what they had unleashed. Poisonous gases trapped in the rock for thousands of years began seeping through the cracks. Carbon monoxide and hydrogen sulfide flowed into the cave system. Owen Wallace, a 27-year-old chief electrician, arrived at Howe Caverns for work. John Sagendorf, a 45-year-old company secretary, came with him. The two men entered the elevator and descended into the cave. They had no idea deadly gases were filling the passages below. Wallace and Sagendorf began a routine maintenance work near the Belle of Moscow formation. Wallace worked on electrical connections while Sagendorf checked safety barriers. Neither man noticed the invisible poison building around them. The first symptoms were barely noticeable: slight shortness of breath and mild dizziness. But the gases were attacking their bodies. Their vision blurred and coordination failed. Both men collapsed in the depths of the cavern. The invisible poison had taken their lives. On the surface, a 25-year-old cave guide grew worried. The two men should have returned by now. He decided to go down and look for them. The guide discovered their collapsed bodies near the Belle of Moscow formation. Then he realized something terrifying. He was experiencing the same symptoms: dizziness, difficult breathing, and growing weakness. He abandoned any hope of helping them and ran for his life. Fighting the poison, he stumbled toward the elevator. Each step was a battle to stay conscious. He collapsed the moment he reached the surface. People rushed him to a hospital in Albany. He barely survived the gas poisoning. Rescue teams with oxygen equipment retrieved Wallace and Sagendorf's bodies later that morning. Medical examination confirmed both men died from poisonous gases caused by the quarry blast.